Please understand, we just want what is best for your son. The reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard must be taken care of. He had many enemies. Wasn't L. Ron Hubbard a science fiction writer? Yes, but he was also a prophet who knew the secret truth about the nature of life.
This is just too much.
We want to reveal to Stan the great secret of life behind our church, the safely guarded Scientology Doctrine. Please, your son deserves to be enlightened. Stan, do you want to hear the great secret doctrine of life behind Scientology?
Sure.
All right, go ahead and tell him. Would you excuse us, please? This is highly classified church information. Oh, rats. Usually to hear the secret doctrine, you have to be in the church for several years, Stan. Are you ready to hear the truth?
I guess.
You see, Stan, there is a reason for people feeling sad and depressed. An alien reason. It all began 75 million years ago. Back then, there was a galactic federation of planets, which was ruled over by the evil Lord Xenu. Xenu thought his galaxy was overpopulated, and so he rounded up countless aliens from all different planets, and then had those aliens frozen. The frozen alien bodies were loaded onto Xenu's galactic cruisers, which looked like DC-8s, except with rocket engines. The cruisers then took the frozen alien bodies to our planet, Earth, and dumped them into the volcanoes of Hawaii. The aliens were no longer frozen, they were dead. The souls of those aliens, however, lived on, and all floated up towards the sky. But the evil Lord Xenu had prepared for this. Xenu didn't want their souls to return, and so he built giant soul catchers in the sky. The souls were taken to a huge soul brainwashing facility, which Xenu had also built on Earth. There, the souls were forced to watch days of brainwashing material, which tricked them into believing a false reality. Xenu then released the alien souls, which roamed the Earth aimlessly in a fog of confusion. At the dawn of man, the souls finally found bodies which they could grab onto. They attached themselves to all mankind, which still to this day causes all our fears, our confusions, and our problems. L. Ron Hubbard did an amazing thing telling the world this incredible truth. Now all we're asking you to do is pick up where he left off.
But I don't know any of this stuff.
Neither did L. Ron when he started. He said he just closed his eyes and wrote down whatever came to mind. You can do the same. Just let it flow.
Okay, I'll try. I just wish I could write in my room, but Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet.
I know. We've sent Nicole Kidman up there to see if she can help.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome back to Murder, She Told. My name is Madison, and we are in for another installment of Black Girl Reacts, my series where I react to documentaries that I've either seen or haven't seen in a long time, and you want me to react to them. I usually try and link them down below, and I usually tell you where you can find these documentaries to watch on your own. But today, we have a special episode. We are going to be watching the documentary Going Clear. Now, I know there's kind of a theme with the documentaries that I'm watching, lots of cult stuff, because that's something that, like, honestly, cults, the sociology behind how cults start, cult leaders, what happens in some of these really extreme cults, all of these things interest me to the umpteenth degree. Goes right along with my interest in true crime and goes right along with my interest in anything horror, anything creepy, anything of that nature. So I'm just so excited to be discussing Going Clear. This is a documentary that I've seen a few times, I'm going to be honest, but I have not seen it within the past 3 years. It's about Scientology, which is, one of the most known about cults, especially if you're in LA and you live near or you've driven past that big ass blue Scientology building right across from the Kaiser on Sunset. It is something that is huge here. There's obviously, we know John Travolta, we know Tom Cruise, we know Lisa Remini, who made a show after she left Scientology, which is really, really good, which is on Netflix, I believe, and I highly recommend you guys watch that. There's 3 seasons, and she goes into depth about her experience and other people's experiences who had just recently left the cult itself. The thing about Scientology that always gets me is that it was created by a man who was deeply, deeply unwell and had been quoted to say the easiest way to get rich is to create a religion because you don't have to pay taxes. So to me, that's sus. Sus point number 1. The next part of it being uncomfortable in terms of L. Ron Hubbard is he used to be a fiction writer. And he currently holds the world record for writing the most fiction ever by a human being. So those two combined facts about the leader of Scientology, it makes it so it's kind of like, this guy can't be trusted. This religion doesn't seem good. And it clearly doesn't make any fucking sense. But, as we know with cults, they don't show you their real face until you're in too deep. And so we're going to be hearing from people who left the church, who started when it was really new, people who were legacies in the church. So their parents were in the church and they were birthed in the church and they were raised in the church. So we're going to get to know all of the culture around the church. I think some of the most iconic content about Scientology would probably be the South Park episodes. And I don't know what season it is, but it's the one where R. Kelly's stuck in the closet, which is like, well, Tom Cruise is stuck in the closet, and then R. Kelly's stuck in the closet. And it's hilarious, but the most poignant thing about it is the fact that that is what they actually believe when they're explaining what Scientologists believe. So it's just one of those things where it's another classic episode of South Park. Love South Park. But it's probably where most people, that's where I first heard about Scientology, was by watching South Park. Comment down below if you remember when you used to be able to watch all the South Park episodes online for free on something called South Park Studios, and you can make a very own South Park avatar. I'm that old. So comment down below if you remember that time period. But that being said, I'm going to let the documentary speak for itself. Let me kind of get myself sorted out and start this screen recording and get this up. If you want to know where to find this documentary, I don't know where you can find it for free, unfortunately. But I know it's on HBO Max. And it's been on there for years. It's also based on a book from somebody who, I don't know if he was an ex-Scientologist, but it's based on a book. So, well, the documentary isn't based on a book, but I think it's produced and it has the same name as a book, which was one of the first physical writings of someone going against the Church of Scientology. Let me get my charger, because I don't want to be bending down later on. That doesn't go there. Ha ha ha. So, anyway, like I said, you can find it on HBO Max, which, honestly, I love it as a streaming platform because I think it honestly has the best shit, but it's so unreliable. Like, it'll freeze up. It's so annoying, but you deal with it because they have the best-ish. So, let me see. The new Sex and the City came out. I don't even like Sex and the City, honestly. What am I talking about? Ooh, there's some good documentaries here. Okay, let me just search Going Clear. What else did I want to say? Oh, and if you're not sure, if you don't want to pay the monthly, but you have cable, you can have HBO Max through your cable login. Pro tip, that's how I have a lot of streaming services. I like that option because it's like, if we're paying for the cable, like, why are we also paying for like the monthly payment for the subscription? Let me get everything set up. Okay. Let me get my screen recorded. Let's see, new screen recording. Okay. So, without further ado, let us get into this documentary, another installment of Black Girl Reacts, and it's going to be a Black girl reacting to Going Clear. I haven't seen this in a while, so I'm excited. All right, let's get into it.
Bunch of young kids like how we go.
We were all very heated, very excited about this.
It's called Going Clear, the Scientology and the Prison of Belief.
I think the first time I saw Hubbard and I was in awe.
Because you thought you were doing good. I mean, so you had some gratification.
Oh, I felt a tremendous amount of relief.
I've got the answers for everything within the religion.
What are you most afraid of? It was dark.
3 in the morning, there's a knock on the hotel room door.
Stop. I'll say whatever you want. I'll write up anything.
I flipped out. I mean, I started punching holes in the walls.
Things didn't seem quite right.
And you just feel so foolish at that point.
Do you have a secret you're afraid I will find?
Yes.
Yes.
Go to the beginning of that incident.
Okay, all right.
Tell me about it.
I was 21 years old, living in London, Ontario, Canada. I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. And someone had told me about what they said there's this cult in New York called Scientology, which I'd never heard of. And if you give them all your money, they'll make anything possible in your life. And about 6 months later,
This man's name is Paul Haggis.
I was there selling books. Then I realized they were all
35 years in.
Dianetics, which again I'd never heard of. He handed me one and asked me to look at it. I was talking, I wasn't really listening to him. As I opened the cover and it said, stamped on the inside page, said Church of Scientology. And I said, take me there.
All right, here we go. I'm not a great multitasker, you know, and if I feel like doing something, that's what I do. And I was into this shit, and I was becoming an auditor. Like, I was in Scientology probably 4 months, and I had done more than John Travolta had done, and he'd been there for 85 years or some shit.
Calling names.
My agents call, you know, you got an audition, fuck it, I'm really, you know what I mean?
13 years
I
in.
was on about a spiritual adventure, and this was like, whoa, this is an interesting road, you know? So, what was the question?
So tell me, how was it you first got involved in Scientology?
Well, I was introduced to it by some friends. I don't know if they said it or if it was just talked about by others that they had superpowers. And I was like really young, but I thought I'd like to have superpowers. But also I had done so much political social work. So
Spanky Taylor, 17 years in.
To handling a lot of the world's problems instead of trying to handle things en masse. You could deal with it person by person, make each person better, and thus the world would get better in short order.
Their events are so creepy. Like, look at this stage.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to our whole new world. It's a world where the operative phrase reads, exceeding all expectations, transcending all parameters, extending the boundaries beyond any boundary, not to mention Godspeed, lightning speed, and a quantum leap in sheer rapidity of progress up the bridge.
David Miscavige, the chairman of the board of the Church of Scientology. This is the head honcho.
My favorite concept of Scientology is a world without criminality, a world without war, and a world without insanity. And I know of no other group that...
I just want to say, I don't know if there's any sociological studies about why so many white people join cults in America, specifically in America, because I know there's other cults in other nations, but it's like, it seems like most most intense extreme cults are populated by mostly white people, and it's always for the purpose of making the world a better place and saving the world. Like, John Travolta is like, yeah, and I'm a part of this organization where they're saying no wars and no poor people and this and that, and how amazing does that sound? And it's like, Sure, but that's a utopia and that's not possible. And the reality is, we don't really need a religion to point out that the world's imperfect and fix it through that religion, especially in America, considering we are supposed to be a secular country. But what we do need is people lobbying for policies that directly help the working class and the poor individuals in this country, the people that need it the most. But instead, they join something like Scientology, a made-up religion that was made in the 50s, I think, and want to feel self-important by the individual work that they're doing and want to be able to say, well, I am a Scientologist and I'm with this organization and we are trying to make the world a better place, instead of actually lobbying and using his star power to maybe make some good legislation to help poor people and stuff like that. I feel like there's something there with white people and cults and wanting to feel self-righteous and self-important, and I feel like that's connected to their violent history in this country. I don't know. I'm just spitting stuff. I don't know if this is true. Oh, Tom.
Were you there? What did you do? So what do you say? Clean this place up? Because we're counting on you. All right? Dweller H.
He's so creepy. He's the author of Going Clear, of Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief. He's the author of the book.
But full of a kind of crushing certainty that eliminates doubt. You know, my goal wasn't to write an expose. It was simply to understand Scientology. Trying to understand what people get out of it. You know, why did they go into it in the first place? I was interested in intelligent and skeptical people who are drawn into a belief system and wind up acting on those beliefs in ways they never thought they would.
It cost $50. The thing that absolutely got me and stayed with me forever was the very first thing I read when you opened the course back, and it said, paraphrasing, don't believe any of this.
Oh.
If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, discard it. I was troubled by the fact they called it a religion, but I figured, oh, it's some tax scam. It's fine with me. It's not.
He was fine with the tax scam.
As long as it works.
The first exercise after you do all this reading and stuff like that is this thing called OTTR0, which is basically you sit just like this, eyes closed, 3 feet away from somebody who's doing the same thing, and you basically confront them. You know? And in Scientology lingo, I went exterior. Exteriorizing is what they call it. You know, you leave your body. So it was a transcendent experience for me. And that made me go, holy fucking shit, this is, wow.
I was reading books and going to lectures and going to things at the different events at the mission, at the local Santa Clara mission. And then I knew I wanted to join the Sea Org and get really involved as soon as I could, which would be right out of high school. Sea Org is the most fraternal order of the organization. It's people who really, really believe in the cause and sign a billion-year contract.
A billion-year contract, which is like weird.
As soon as I could. I left skid marks getting into that billion-year contract. You thought you were doing something good to have a positive effect on all of mankind. That's what Hubbard says. Everything you do for endless trillions of years depends on what you do.
A civilization without insanity, without criminals, without war, where the able can prosper and honest beginnings can have rights. Honest beings can have rights. And where man is free to rise to greater heights are the aims of Scientology.
I began to ask this question, what is man? And I found, oddly enough, that nobody could tell me what man was. What did he consist of? Where was he going? What was he doing? To really know life, you've got to be part of life. You must get down and look. You must get into the nooks and crannies of existence. You have to rub elbows with all kinds and types of men before you can finally establish what he is.
And you in fact did this?
Yes, I've slept with bandits in Mongolia, and I've hunted with pygmies in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, I have studied 21 different primitive races.
Here we go. Oh, God.
And my conclusions were that man, he was a spiritual being that was pulled down to the material, the fleshly interests, to an interplay in life that was, in fact, too great for him to confront. And I concluded finally that he needed a hand.
So what does that make you, God?
To understand Scientology, you have to understand the life and mind of its inventor, L. Ron Hubbard. He actually holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of books published, more than 1,000. Hubbard got his start in the Depression, writing pulp fiction named for the cheap paper used. Writers were paid a penny a word, so they had to write a lot to make money. Hubbard hammered away so fast on long rolls of butcher paper that he used to drip sweat on his typewriter. Hubbard's career took off when he began to write for a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction. Along with authors like Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, Hubbard wrote stories with a sense of mission to get man to the stars.
A lot of what Scientology is, he had previously written about in the form of his science fiction. He had the ability to fabricate these amazing tales, and he transported those imaginary stories into his theology.
After Pearl Harbor, Hubbard took command of a subchaser, but he was still a man prone to invention. He would write that he sunk 2 Japanese subs, but in fact, just off the coast of Oregon, he opened fire on what turned out to be a log and dropped most of his depth charges on underwater magnetic rocks. When he accidentally shelled a Mexican island, he was relieved of his command.
A guy named Jack Parsons, a fascinating man, was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there's actually a crater on the moon named after Jack. He was a significant scientific figure, but he was also the head honcho in this black magic cult. It was called the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis. They followed the teachings of Aleister Crowley, a famous sexual magic figure in England. Parsons had a mansion in Pasadena. They would have ceremonies.
Shouts out to Dina.
Some sort of goddess figure that he could impregnate in order to create the Antichrist. Hubbard moved in and became Parsons' assistant. One night, this beautiful redhead named Marjorie Cameron showed up at the door. She was perfectly willing to engage in this sexual ritual in order, supposedly, to produce the Antichrist. She and Jack eventually got married. That happened after Hubbard ran off with Jack's girlfriend, Sarah Northrop.
Scientology and Hubbard would later refuse to acknowledge his relationship with Sarah. But we uncovered Sarah's own recollections of her time with Hubbard.
That he was a great war hero. A captain of a ship that had been downed in the Pacific, and he was weeks on a raft, and he'd been blinded by the sun, and his back had been broken. All these things were complete lies, but I didn't know it at the time. I believed every word of it.
If only Sarah had seen Hubbard's military records. In a 900-page file, Hubbard's activities are laid out in extraordinary detail. Hubbard told people that he had been blinded and crippled during the war, and that practices that would form the basis of Scientology had cured him. But his records show that his only wounds were mild arthritis and conjunctivitis.
Pink eye.
We had this terrible fight, and he told me he was going to commit suicide if I didn't marry him.
Not a good start.
So we got married.
I'm just gonna quickly pause here and just say, ladies, anybody who's dating, age differences are a big thing, and I think it's important to know and to say from experience, if you're dealing with someone who's older than you and you're like 19, 18, early 20s, and they're like late 20s or like early 30s or whatever, or even older, chances are it's not because you're more mature. It's because you're more malleable and you'll believe them. You have to ask yourself, why is this old man with me? And he'll probably say, it's because you're this, it's because you're that. But really, it's usually a control thing. So take this as a warning, because you could be dating the next cult leader who will screw you. Just the more you know.
We moved to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and he started writing Dianetics. The book was conceived, and he started working on it in 1950. He said many times that the only way to make any real money was to have a religion. That's essentially what he was trying to do with Dianetics.
Sketchy.
A religion where he could have an income, and the government wouldn't take it away from him in the form of taxes.
Scheming.
Dianetics was an immense success. From the moment it was published in 1950, it swept through America and other countries around the world.
This book, that's the background of all of this. That's what started all the trouble. And we expected this to sell about 6,000 copies, and it hit the top of the bestseller list of the New York Times, and it just stayed there month in, month out. And it was like I started an avalanche.
Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, is considered to be the fundamental text which is the foundation upon which all else is built.
The concept of Dianetics is that you have two sides of your mind. There is the analytical side, which is a perfect computer. It remembers everything. It's flawless. It never makes a mistake. And then there's the reactive side. And this is where all your neuroses and anxieties and fears are stored. And where do they come from? They come from engrams. An engram is like a memory.
Man has an automobile accident. He has a picture of an automobile accident. He has all the sensations of having been hurt in the automobile accident. It takes him a long time to recover because he's still wearing the automobile accident. If you said, hey, why don't you take this automobile accident and throw it away? Why, all of a sudden he recovers from the automobile accident, naturally. Because the thing that's keeping it impressed upon him and his body is his mind. An auditor is a practitioner in Scientology. He listens and he computes. We have a meter, and a meter simply shows where an individual is aberrated.
The e-meter is a very powerful instrument. It's 1/3 of a lie detector. A lie detector would also measure your respiration and pulse.
Body, and as your mental mass increases, so does the resistance to the circuit. So, the auditor will ask you a question. Tell me about an upset with your mother.
What's truly bothering you about being with, about your wife's behavior? What is it?
Why are you upset today? Well, I had a fight with my wife. Well, I can see.
That there. Was that the same thought?
Say that again. And gradually, the needle will have less response. And in that manner, you discharge the emotion. Then you're asked to go back to earlier incidents that were like that. And you might say, well, my mother spoke to me in the same scolding tone of voice. And you recount that story. And eventually you discharge the emotion.
When you come out of an auditing session, you feel euphoric.
That confessional nature makes you feel better.
Somebody would say, oh, you're going to have a session. I would feel better just hearing that.
Sarah threatened to leave Hubbard unless he got psychiatric help. He responded by kidnapping their baby and taking her to Cuba.
He was incapable of taking care of her.
Because that's a logical next step.
In charge of a mother and daughter who were both mentally retarded. And they apparently kept her in some kind of cage.
He called me and told me that he had killed her.
What?
He said he had cut her into little pieces and dropped the pieces in a river, and it was my fault.
What?
Then he'd call me back and say that she was still alive. And this went on and on and on.
What?
When Hubbard came back to the U.S., Sarah persuaded him to agree to a divorce and give her custody of their daughter. He repackaged the ideas of Dianetics into a religion called Scientology. Hubbard added more science and more structure. Along with the e-meters came a payment plan. Every step to clear had a price tag. How would you describe their business model?
Rapacious.
Right.
It's all about making money. Hubbard, from the beginning, knew that people would pay for this counseling at a pretty good clip. And so he continued to come out with more and more levels. The real money was in paying for these higher and higher courses. They were getting into thousands of dollars. Those prices kept going up and up. That's really where Scientology begins to create this indoctrination. It's Hubbard that came up with that, only Hubbard, and you have to be a part of our group to get that spiritual satisfaction you were looking for.
The Hubbard College of Scientology, Qualifications Division, Department of Certifications and Awards, does hereby certify that Anthony A. Phillips has attained the state of clear.
As more members paid for Hubbard's bridge to total freedom, the church's coffers swelled with hundreds of millions of dollars. From the beginning,
I think that it's important to say this really quickly. Causation does not mean correlation, obviously, and obviously in the 50s, the country was way more segregated. But I also think the fact that immediately when you step over the threshold to a Scientology place, they're already having their hands out and asking for money, also probably barred a lot of people of color from joining. I don't even know if they'd be accepted in this time, but it's interesting. It is. By the mid-1970s, the Scientology ships were no longer welcome to dock at many ports in the Mediterranean. Hubbard set sail for the United States. In Florida, he snuck ashore to avoid subpoenas. I think one of the biggest takeaways of cults, too, is, like, the people that are attracted to them oftentimes not necessarily struggle, but like I said in the Jonestown Black Girl Reacts, check that out. I reacted to the Jonestown documentary. Really good. But the thing that you find is that a lot of these people just want a community of people. And I feel like that's true for all church organizations. Like, part of the reason why people stay is the community and the social aspect of it. In my personal experience, I could say the same for me. Like, I feel like my parents filtered out a lot of things through what the church was telling me to do and what they thought or expected of me, and it didn't always match up, but I trusted them. And I think that ultimately the reason why they stayed so long is because their entire community was in Scientology. So we're watching the very beginning of it, but once there's a second generation and then the third generation of Scientologists that you're being raised in Scientology, all you ever know is this. It starts to get really hard to put your eggs in the basket of believing that this couldn't be true or this isn't true. Do you know what I mean? Like, part of it is a socialization, part of it is a community, part of it is a friends, and to think of what you'd be without those people is frightening for a lot of people, considering that most of these people were going through a transitional period in life and were easily susceptible to something that was like, improve your life by just doing this one thing. We're an organization that's trying to save the world. We're getting caught up in that, kind of in a similar sense of Jonestown too. An organization that's trying to save the world, an organization that's trying to push past the old, system and make a more equitable system where you're going to make the world a better place. And I just really wonder why white people go there. It's very white savior or white man's burden. If you don't know those terms, Google them. It's very that. And I feel like it's always created into such a negative experience and into such an intense cult all the time when the intention is good. People do want to save the world. People do want the world to be a better place. But it's like to grift and take advantage of people in the process is where, it's 2 thumbs down.
Down here and you're not aware of anything. And then you go up here and you're a lot more aware of who you are, your spirituality, your relationship to others. A person is supposed to become more able as they go up the bridge. And then there are the OT levels operating Thetan. And a Thetan is a spiritual being. That's the soul of the person.
And what level over time did you achieve?
OT 8. It's the highest there is. You can't get any higher than OT 8.
From the beginning, you hear these stories people tell of these abilities they've been able to gain.
It was always talked about that people who were OT could read your mind and they could move objects at will and they could, they were cause over matter energies.
So much science fiction in this religion.
Damn good to me.
Sounds suspicious.
Wow, this is great.
So naive, kind of. Like, what the hell?
And they give me the secret materials, which you're hearing about all this time. They're handwritten by Hubbard. You have to keep them in a locked briefcase. Be very cautious, because they would always say, if this gets out, it's dangerous to people. It can actually do them harm if they are not adequately prepared. And I read it. And it doesn't make any sense.
This garbled story that didn't make sense.
I remember for one fleeting second thinking, well, maybe it's an insanity test. Maybe if you believe this, they kick you out. Maybe that's it. That,
right.
Of course, is not the case. They talk about, the fact that the Earth was created and such trillions of years ago, and this guy, space guy.
Galactic overlord. This was the prison planet, and people being caught and captured and being brought to planet Earth.
And put them in volcanoes and then blow them up with A-bombs.
Whoa. I studied geography in school. Those volcanoes didn't exist 75 million years ago.
Right.
And we have these lost souls all over us.
Right.
And I'm going,
how this South Park did such a good job.
I'm down for the self-help stuff. I'm down for, okay, I can be clear. I can get rid of the negative emotions. But what the fuck is this?
Ago, people lived in a world very much like the world of America in the 1950s.
People at that particular time and space were walking around in clothes which looked very remarkably like the clothes.
Why do white people always go to the 50s? Like, make America great again. It's like they're talking about the 50s when it was a terrible time still. It's always the 50s. And we haven't been in the 50s for such a long time, so it's just kind of like, get over it. The 50s was a shitty time for most people, actually, especially people like, you get what I mean. But for people like, I guess it was, post World War II, we were on the top of the world, but it's like embarrassing. It's like, get over it. It wasn't that great. Like, and he's making up a whole, like, planet where it's only the 1950s and it was such an idyllic place, and then something evil happened. And it's like, what? It's crazy.
I kept on trying to audit. I could not figure out how I could have all these spirits of dead people attached to me, inside me, on me. I was clear. For God's sake, I was clear.
People actually have breakdowns, nervous breakdowns, because they spend so much time thinking about being infested by these creatures. If you're really believing that, it can drive you crazy.
Those years of introspection eventually led me to sincerely considering that I was so bad that I couldn't confront how bad I was. I didn't know it at the time, but a depression set in that was with me for years. And the worst thing was that LRH kept ordering me to more auditing. I had to find swords that were stuck in me, hypothetical swords, imaginary swords that were causing all this pain. This auditing went on and on. It wasn't doing any good. I should have been left alone. But everything that I took offense with, I rationalized almost immediately. I had to. I could not continue in this game of Scientology without explaining away what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It got to be a way of believing. And every one of us got into that. It was part of the mind control. It was part of the cultic manipulation.
I don't know why I'm so sleepy, you guys. It's not even that late.
And we took it on, and then we did it to ourselves.
Right.
And I learned from it that I would never, ever again, go do the bidding of a tyrant.
Go, girl. She left the church in 1984. Poor girl.
Hubbard became increasingly paranoid that a powerful Satan had infected his body, and that regular auditing wasn't strong enough to make it leave. When Larry Wright was researching his book, he videotaped an interview with a Scientologist who was asked to help Hubbard expel the Satan.
He was having problems getting rid of a BT, body Thetan. So he wanted me to build a machine and basically blow the Thetan away. Just get him out of there, blow it up, and also kill the body.
It was a suicide.
Basically, yeah. But I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to scare him. So I had read some books about Nikola Tesla and stuff, and I figured maybe building a Tesla coil would probably be the best route to go. I had little electrodes that you hook it up to the E-meter, so when he's on the cans, then he would just flip the button and it would do its thing.
So did he try?
As far as I know, he blew up my E-meter. Burn it up.
Scientology really is a journey into the mind of L. Ron Hubbard. And the further you get into it, the more like L. Ron Hubbard you become.
Insane.
In 1980, LRH moved off the lines so that he could continue his writings and researches without any distractions.
He was going insane is what was happening.
He's now moved on to his next level of OT research. This level is beyond anything any one of us ever imagined. This level is in fact done in an exterior state, meaning that it is done completely exterior from the body. At this level of OT, the body is nothing more than an impediment and encumbrance to any further gain as an OT.
This is the 80s and people believe this. Like, okay.
Thus, at 2000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. Although you may feel grief, understand that he did not and does not now.
Hubbard died of a stroke in 1986.
That seems like the real reason.
The ambitious David Miscavige stepped forward, and by bending arms and making deals, took control of the church and installed a new generation of lieutenants.
Yes. He has to continue.
They are a
Because
mess.
if he looks at it rationally and he sees that it is as I say, it will destroy him. He'll realize that, because he's done a lot worse than I've done. He's abused people on a personal level. It's how he got to the top, and it's how he stayed at the top.
They're calling him out,
At
honey.
the age of 11,
He's so scary
Miscavige joined
looking.
the church with his parents. As a child, his ambition caught Hubbard's eye. So when Hubbard wanted to become a filmmaker, Miscavige was his assistant cameraman. An auditing prodigy, he claimed Scientology cured his asthma. He became a sort of general contractor for the church and was soon named Action Chief, the man who did whatever needed doing for a church that developed a scary reputation for attacking its critics.
Scientology has been in the headlines off and on for 25 years now, almost since the time it was founded as a religion. Scientology's story is one of a church embittered by what it perceives as harassment. We're talking about attacks
No
on
Jonestown
multi-billion-dollar
here.
media conglomerates, world governments, real powers of the world.
They take enemies very seriously.
This comes right out of Hubbard's own policies from the 60s. He's saying we never defend, we always attack. And they've followed it ever since. They call it fair game. And anybody who criticizes Scientology is fair game.
Please welcome Mr. Mike Rinder.
Because Scientology is perceived and conceived by Scientologists as being the salvation for mankind, you can have people that lie with a very straight face if they believe that what they are doing is protecting the Church of Scientology.
L. Ron Hubbard says, we do not find critics of Scientology.
So this guy, if you've never seen the Leah Remini Scientology thing, he is her co-host on that show. So it's great to watch his redemption arc on that show, and he goes into detail about how his family's still in Scientology. He hasn't spoken to them. We'll get probably more into the family issues with Scientology later. But he was the right-hand punisher. Like, he was the one that would go on the interviews, go on the attack to anyone that was speaking out. He would coordinate people to be followed. He would coordinate lawsuits. He would do a bunch of stuff to a lot of the ex-members until he realized that this was bullshit. So what he was kind of alluding to right then was like, you know, you think you're doing good, you think you're doing these things, so you just basically lie in the face of everybody because it's for the greater good of the organization, because you no longer are an individual. So it's interesting that he's in this. I forgot he was in this, but he's also in the Leah Remini show, which I forgot what it's called. But just Google Leah Remini and Scientology, and it's an amazing show. It's on Netflix. I keep saying that.
Who do not have criminal pasts. Do you believe that?
Sure.
People who oppose you are undoubtedly criminals?
I believe that, yeah. You know, there isn't and hasn't been any effort which has been taken to...
This is an old clip.
Critics. No, that doesn't happen. Oh, we would never do that.
Right.
According to many insiders, Hubbard was growing more and more vindictive toward those who stood in his way. He created what he called the Rehabilitation Project Force.
The RPF was what we called it. It was the prison camp where you'd go for reindoctrination.
Prison camps.
It was on the 7th floor of the Hollywood headquarters. A confined space to rehabilitate members who might be harboring subversive thoughts. Spanky was sent to the RPF when she objected to the way the church had denied medical treatment to her boss.
I went thinking, of course, this is a big mistake. And then I got there, and there were like 200 of us. So much of the exec strata of the organization that hit the skid simultaneously.
RPF stands for Rehabilitation Project Force. It is a program that is exclusively for the benefit of C organization members. If they are stressed out, if they're not doing well on their job, have them do menial type work and 5 hours a day of auditing and Scientology training.
5 hours a day.
We were
Fabulous.
Cross my heart. 30 hours on, 3 hours off. Doing like hard labor, like
What?
wire brushes on windowsills and sanding, breathing paint fumes. That regular crew would eat first, and then we'd get what was left.
They'd eat the scraps.
Well, obviously, I need to deal with something that I'm not facing. So perhaps they're doing this to make me better.
So brainwashed. It's really fucking sad.
There's so many bizarre stories that it's just hard to believe stuff. They asked if I could arrange a private screening of Saturday Night Fever. And I was like, what? I disappeared from this man's life. I abandoned him, and now you want me to arrange a private screening? What do you... I said, is there anything else? Maybe a Beatles reunion.
Travolta had been wondering where Spanky was. When she was sent to the RPF, she was not allowed to contact him or anyone else. But now, under the watch of a guard, she was permitted to call Travolta's assistant.
She said we could use John's personal print of the film under one condition, that you'll see John. I was so excited.
John Travolta denies making this arrangement.
We had the screening of the film, and on the next night I was supposed to have dinner with Johnny. And after the screening, I was abruptly told I wasn't going to see him and I needed to call and cancel. He was truly angry at me for having allowed this abuse of myself, you know, and for having that so little of myself. That I would allow this degree of degradation and he was my good friend and I knew.
I just don't understand why he would be so rude to her if he ended up finding out the whole story that they denied her access to him. She's like, oh, he was upset because I was taking all this abuse and this and that, and it wasn't like me. And it's like, yeah, but he's still actively a huge part and member of Scientology. So it's like, why is he blaming you? They're the ones who brainwash you. They're the ones who are abusing you. Weird.
That he was telling me the truth. Those words were such a wake-up call for me. And I went over there to the cadet org. There were so many sick children in there, and my daughter was very, very ill, burning up with fever, completely neglected, in a urine-soaked crib. Her eyes were so filled with mucus, they were welded shut. She had fruit flies on her body, and I just...
Wow.
I couldn't bear it. I just went, no, I'm done.
What were they doing to these kids? Not the babies being neglected. That's so sketchy. And that's another thing with cults. Like, I feel like there's either an obsession with the children, but they're used as tools and they're used as pawns. Like we saw with the evangelicals and Becky in the last installment of Black Girl Reacts. But it's like... honey, like, so many cults really only care about children as far as they can use them as tools and indoctrinate them early so that they can be easily malleable when they're adults and don't know what life was like before this. But it's like in this, one of the most diabolical things about Scientology to me is the intense disregard for children in general. Like, the neglect, they had, Scientology boarding schools. Basically, they believed that a child, because the body thetan that was, put into them when they were born, it could be an adult, it could be your mother from a past life, it could be a bunch of stuff. So they weren't treated as children. And what you'll see in the Leah Remini show that I keep talking about, but it's super good, is how that would affect the kids and their parents' relationship, because they were effectively abused. What Spanky was going through with the hard labor in the RPA is what the kids would go through in boarding school. And they were abused. They were away from their parents because they were thought to be a distraction. So there were forced abortions, which is really scary, and just ultimate kind of disdain for children in general. But if you did have kids, they would be our slaves and they would be doing hard labor for hours and hours a day.
I mean, I just knew I could make these choices for me. I could decide to give up my life and do this to help the world. But I couldn't make these choices for my children. I just had to get her out.
Which is a good...
I called one of the few non-Scientologists I knew, a wonderful woman who happened to work for John Travolta. I said, meet me at this address. I gave her a time and I hung up. I go up to my daughter's room and I wrapped her up.
If you have to escape like this, you know it's bad.
I said, my sister-in-law is in that car. She's going to take the baby to the doctor. He said, well, has this been approved? Of course it was approved. She's in my arms, and I got in the car. My friend, she just nods her head. Boom, with that, I pull my leg and shut that door. She hits the locks, and we drive, and people are yelling my name. Spanky, no, no. I mean, just freaked out. I'm thinking, I'm a dead person. Something terrible is going to happen to me. I was just so frightened that they would come to fetch me up.
Oh, Spanky. Spanky left the church in 1987.
He understood what was happening to Spanky. He didn't do anything about it.
I know that he certainly got exposed to the fact that not everything was on the up and up. Why that wasn't sufficient for him to leave, I don't know. I often wonder what could possibly keep him there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall an incident which occurred when your mother looked younger?
An auditor learns to keep notes contemporaneously as he is doing a session about every detail of the person's life, back to birth and beyond. If you do the whole program, you end up with up to a file cabinet full of pretty clear folders on notations about your life and your thoughts and your considerations about your life. It's the most intimate detail. You're always encouraged, you're always threatened to disclose more and more and more, and all of it's recorded. All of this material, which is represented to you to be held sacrosanct, in fact, any information that might do some harm to the organization gets unclassified automatically and gets reported to another branch of the church that deals with ethics.
Miscavige would sit in this 15 by 15 room, cameras of every session. You can flip in between them, and he was watching these things, and it was for training purposes. Well, Travolta saw that and said, I will not be videoed. So I was there when they were setting it up, and Miscavige was directing it, get him into a hotel room, hook up secret private videos.
Wow.
There were rumors that he was threatening to leave. And another Scientologist told me that he was delegated to create a black PR package. All the damaging material they could use against Travolta, which came from his auditing sessions.
I know this because I used to do it when I was the head of the Office of Special Affairs.
Right.
We would put a team of people onto going through all of these PC folders and finding things that they believe by exposing them or threatening to expose them, they will cower the person that they're worried about into silence.
Once that happened, I think he was really the church's captive.
Mr. John Travolta.
Facing lawsuits and stuff like that, he'd be brought forward and make his testimony about how great Scientology is. He had the opportunity to affect the behavior of the church, and he chose not to.
Now, I've been a Scientologist for 23 years. I felt like a pioneer in many ways, and I've seen my efforts come to fruition, in various ways. So I think very few people can say that. I'm part of a frontier in a way, that very few people ever get to be part of.
A single person on a gigantic stage, all this sort of Nazi symbolism.
Yeah, there's lots of Nazi symbolism. White people,
and Miscavige up in that office.
You got to answer for that.
20 hours a day writing this speech and thinking to myself, my God, this is not just a victory celebration. This is a coup.
What we are going to talk about is the war to end all wars. When you were in Scientology, you were in all the way. There's no half in and half out.
A decade into Miscavige's leadership, a simmering crisis finally came to a boil. For years, Hubbard had insisted that Scientology was a religion and should be tax exempt, so he had refused to pay any taxes.
We were facing a tax bill of over $1 billion, and the total assets, liquid and material and property of the church was about a quarter of that at the time in the 80s. And so just from a real simple accounting basis, it was life and death. If we don't get exemption, we die. If we get it, we survive.
Now, as L. Rage said, one certainly couldn't contest anyone as holy as the Commissioner of the IRS, whom I believe gives God his orders. LRH.
Faced with this crisis, David Miscavige formulated a strategy. Think of the nerve that it takes to decide to take on a war with the IRS.
The Church of Scientology has been crucifying the federal agency for its sins on a regular basis,
both in and out of courts.
Thousands of Scientologists all filed lawsuits, not just against the IRS, but against individual IRS employees. 2,400 total lawsuits, all going at the IRS at one time. It was a litigation nightmare.
Being Miscavige's right-hand man, I was in charge of all those efforts.
Wow.
We were not only suing them in every possible jurisdiction.
It's the white urge to do whatever you can to make it so inconvenient for people that they just give up instead of actually being right about something, but then claiming you're right about something. They're saying that the way that they were able to get tax exemption, even though this was a made-up religion, I guess all religions are made up. Cut that. Cut the cameras. No, I'm just kidding. But they hadn't paid their taxes and they weren't considered tax exempt by the IRS when LRH was in charge, when he was in charge. And so in order to do that, they literally filed thousands of lawsuits to the IRS. For them to get so jammed up in lawsuits, they just gave up and gave them tax exemption status and was like, yeah, whatever, the bill's forgiven, even though they owed over $1 billion in back taxes. And literally they're like, they're tax exempt because we can't deal with the harassment anymore. And then they're over here celebrating it like they finally saw that we were a religious entity. And it's like, no, they didn't. You're a mess.
On October the 1st, 1993, at 8:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the IRS issued letters recognizing Scientology and every one of its organizations as fully tax exempt.
The war is over.
The war ended
Oh my
because
God.
the IRS surrendered. It forgave the billion-dollar tax bill and granted Scientology its tax exemption. Even Hubbard's novels were declared religious texts.
What?
Say it was exempt from taxes.
What?
What happened is that
That's insane.
who was the IRS commissioner at that time, Miscavige let Goldberg know that if we could find a way to get tax exempt status, all those lawsuits will go away overnight.
And as we were going out the door, Fred Goldberg goes, "Is he serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And he sort of breathed a sigh of relief and kind of nodded and smiled.
Yeah.
At the church's victory party, Miscavige projected photos of the church's executives celebrating with IRS officials.
It created this tremendous juggernaut of tight conspiracy of the membership that then existed. But what it really did was enable Miscavige to milk every last dime out of that core membership.
Churches are tax exempt because they're supposed to provide a public good. To prove that good to the IRS, churches aren't supposed to hoard their money. They're supposed to spend it on services for the faithful. Under this pretense, the church has made massive investments in tax-free real estate all over the world. And when it comes to labor costs, they are almost free.
The max I got paid, on a weekly basis was $50 for 28 years.
Wow.
Workers take home something between 6 and 40 cents an hour. So if you've got very low labor costs, no taxes to pay, and wealthy people giving you donations, you can see why Scientology has amassed huge piles of money. How much are they worth? This was a bit of a mystery, but just recently I obtained tax records that Scientology does have to turn in. 3 of the main entities of Scientology, and there are 20 or 30 of them, but the top 3, just on their own, have a book value of $1.5 billion.
Oh, God.
It's stunning how much money a non-profit has been able to amass.
Tom Cruise was the guy. Miscavige and Cruise have been pretty buddy-buddy way back to Days of Thunder. He was on the set with them, went skydiving with them, was hanging out with them all the time, and that was when Tom first met Nicole.
He had really fallen for her. They got married, and this posed a dilemma for the church because her father was a well-known psychologist in Australia. From the church's perspective, he's the enemy. He's a suppressive person.
How could you do?
Because Nicole is still in a relationship with her father, that makes her dangerous. She's a potential trouble source, PTS. And because Tom is related to her, this all causes trouble from the church's perspective. You have to break that dynamic.
Nicole, her biggest beef was that Tom was becoming increasingly like Dave. She really got him to drift away from the church, and Tom was not really actively involved in Scientology between 92-ish all the way up till 2001. Miscavige was brilliant at flaming people's fears and building up their egos.
So you were being audited by Marty at the same time he was auditing Cruise?
Oh, yeah, it was, Tom Cruise. Tom would go in, and then I would go in, and Tom would go in, and I would go in, and Tom would go in. So, you know. And I've been audited by the best auditors on the planet. Best auditor, hands down. I mean, like the kind of Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky kind of auditor is Marty. They stole him, you know. Tom thinks he's supposed to be dating Miscavige.
By 2004, Tom Cruise was the most gung-ho.
Okay, let's compare this to Jonestown really quickly, because this is almost ending. There's no mission statement except for saving the planet. What we're talking about only in this is not how the rhetoric changed or, you know, what they were doing for people changed. It's about how, from the start, this was a rapacious, savage, no privacy, disgusting, grifting situation club that preyed on what people feel is their most weakest point, which is socialization with other people. Like, compared to Jonestown, Jonestown was like integration, all of this stuff. I'm not bigging up Jonestown. Or not. But what I will say is they had a message and it was clear. They wanted the world to be a better place. And they're just saying that. And it's such a thin veneer because really behind it is how much money can we get? Can we get tax exempt? They haven't accomplished anything. And it's just crazy that this documentary is so, you know, because there's so many celebrities in Scientology to this day. The girl from that 70s show, the guy from that 70s show, the girl from, what's it called? Handmaid's Tale. She's still active in Scientology. Kirstie Alley, that dumb bitch, is still active in Scientology. But it's like, they literally haven't talked about anything with substance, haven't talked about what they've done in the community. It's all been how they just get more money and maintain their empire and continuously abuse the people that they get their money from. That's all that I've heard from this. And that's why I think this, we'll get into my final thoughts later, but it's just crazy.
They even did a calculation where they figured between his films and all the opinion leaders that he had met and all the travel he had done,
Tom Cruise has introduced LOH technology to over 1 billion people of Earth.
No question, he has been a huge asset to them.
Which is why the story of Tom Cruise, Scientologist, has only just begun.
I think it's a privilege to call yourself a Scientologist, and it's something that you have to earn.
Scientology loves to use this word end phenomena. Every level has an end phenomena, you know, that you attain. And Tom Cruise shows that. That video with him in the black turtleneck sweater.
A Scientologist is someone who can look at the world and really see what it is. Not only look at it and see it, but be able to go and be effective and do something about it.
He's as arrogant and as untouchable as could possibly be. At the same time, he looks like an utter crazy paranoiac.
Well, Miscavige would do anything for the church's most famous celebrity.
Wow.
Miscavige began to turn against the Sea Org's highest-ranking executives.
He pretty much had international management shut down. He was into this deep paranoia thing about everybody's out to get him.
He very definitely wiped out that organizational pattern in order to be able to have ultimate power.
In 2004, Miscavige ordered the top officers of the Sea Org to Scientology's Gold Base in Southern California. He forced them to live in a pair of double-wide trailers that came to be called the Hole.
The doors had bars put on them, the windows all had bars put on them, and there was one entrance door that a security guard sat at 24 hours a day.
I had to stay there, sleep there. It stunk, and there were ants crawling around. You sleep about an hour, 2 hours a night. You were in such a mental state that you're very controllable, very suggestible. We were told we needed to come up with what each other's crimes were against Miscavige and Hubbard so that we could eventually get out of the hole.
Poisonous environment. People were really frightened. And this went on for years. This isn't a couple of days. The nominal president of the church is a man named Hubbard. She was in there for 7 years.
Ew.
What is the statement? God helps those who help themselves. Well, in Scientology, we're engaged in helping people help themselves so they can fully comprehend and understand God.
God, okay.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
It's so crazy because, like, when you start to think about, like, breaking up, like, what do they actually believe? What do they actually believe in? What is important to them? Like, literally, you don't know anything. Like, it's just crazy. Like, there's nothing of substance of this organization other than the money that the people gain, the organization gains, and the celebrities that are attached to it. I don't even know if they believe in God. They say they believe in Xenu or whatever the fuck. So it's just like, I've never thought about it that way, but having just watched the Jonestown documentary, you're just like, huh? Like, what? Like, seriously, it's just ridiculous.
Over the past week, we've been reporting on allegations of physical abuse inside the Church of Scientology. We spoke with the ex-wives of some of the men making the claims of abuse. I read all of your affidavits. Obviously, your ex-husbands have made charges against David Miscavige, saying that they have seen repeated acts of physical violence perpetrated by Mr. Miscavige. Is any of that true?
No, not one ounce of it. That's not the character of Mr. David Miscavige.
My ex-wife, Marty Rathbun's ex-wife, Tom DeVogt's ex-wife, that were on Anderson Cooper, they all came out of the hole. They were all sent there to do that. They went back to the hole. It's just ridiculous. This line that my ex-wife said,
I lived with Mike Linder for over 35 years. I know every square inch of Mike Linder's body.
she said it because she was told to say it by Miscavige. And the proof of that is when Tom DeVogt's ex-wife then repeated the same thing over again.
I knew every inch of him.
You gotta be kidding me.
Everything that happens from the Church of Scientology is scripted.
Don't ever turn the other cheek and acquiesce. Hit them back.
And then I started to find out, all the stuff that was really happening. I lost money. I got fucked. But then I found out about the abuse in the Sea Org. And I felt like, fuck me, I gotta do something about it. And I finally tracked down Marty Rathbun. Everybody thought he was dead. He was in fucking Mexico. I went down there and I basically convinced him to talk. And we gotta do something. And then he started his blog.
There was a beating every day. And if it wasn't him doing it, it was from him inciting others to do it to others.
I think that it's a cult.
I'm doing my own thing. I want to get on with my life.
I am telling the truth.
Suddenly, I heard the senior members of the church were speaking out. So, I started to look. I started to read. And then I started to reach out to people. Two of my daughters are gay and told me how they'd been treated within the church. I didn't know.
Paul Haggis's daughters were openly harassed by church members for being gay. Investigating further, Haggis discovered the church doctrine viewed homosexuality as a disease that only Hubbard's teachings could cure. And a California chapter of Scientology had supported a ban on gay marriage.
I can't be part of an organization that doesn't support human rights for everyone. So I sent a letter to 25 friends in the church that I was resigning. And I'd hoped that they would read this letter and be horrified at the things I found out. A few days later, I drive home. There looked to be 10 people standing in my front yard. I recognized them, they're my friends. They said, Paul, we need you to tear up this letter. And we need you to get all the copies and tear them up and resign quietly. So I don't do that. So I don't do that.
The church's active membership has dropped to fewer than 50,000 people, yet the financial value of Scientology is soaring.
And how about we just say 2013 is the year we went stratospheric.
The church is making investments and buying valuable real estate all over the world. That financial clout gives Scientology enormous power. It's a kind of tax-free shell company growing past $3 billion in assets.
Wow.
The church now no longer has a public face. There's no spokespeople, they don't do media interviews. And that suits Miscavige. There is nobody that he is willing to have be the face of Scientology other than himself, but he's afraid to be interviewed by anybody for fear that they are going to ask him questions that he can't answer or doesn't want to answer.
Where are the checks and balances on his power? There is none. So there are two things that could happen. One is the IRS would reconsider its tax exemption. The only other thing is that some of these celebrity megaphones could turn against the church. And Tom Cruise should be leading that chorus.
But he won't. That was super crazy, wasn't it? I haven't watched that documentary in a super long time. But it's dark. It's so dark because it's not about a creed or a code of conduct or really anything. They claim that they're about making the world a better place one person at a time, but really that's just the thing to get you through the door. What ends up happening is you're audited relentlessly, forced to indoctrinate yourself, tested, loyalty tested constantly. And all they're doing is collecting files on you to blackmail you to stay, while also pickpocketing you to the tune of a few $100,000 and ruining your mental state. That's all Scientology is. There is no substance. There is no meaning. There is nothing behind it. You're not doing anything. And then they keep you there through the stuff you revealed in your auditing files or by keeping your family hostage. It's so diabolical because at least with Jonestown, there was a commune, there was a message. And I keep saying that in this video. And I never thought I'd be like, well, Jonestown was better comparatively. But on the merits of actually having some substance to it and actually doing some good, they do have Scientology beat. It's just crazy that so many famous people still donate money to Scientology with all these allegations, still donate their time, still advocate for it. It's gross and it's scary and it's weird. But you have to think about how ego-driven and ego-based it is. They sought out being a place of refuge for celebrities for that purpose. To be able to get notoriety for themselves while also boosting the ego of these people. The way they were talking about the Tom Cruise situation, auditioning girlfriends, like, it's crazy. That interview with him in the turtleneck, he looked deranged. But the fact that this still exists, I see it every time I have to go to a doctor's appointment on Sunset. They're worth to the tune of $3 billion and have tax exemption status because they bullied the whole entire IRS. Who does stuff like that? Suffice it to say, that was intense. That was a lot. It was dark. I really enjoyed watching it with you guys. It's been a while. Comment down below your opinions about Scientology. If you know anyone in Scientology, comment down below any documentary recommendations that you think I should get into, that you want to see me watch. I would love to see it. Like this video subscribe, click that notification bell so you're notified anytime I post a new video. And without further ado, Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards.